Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Be More podcast, where we inspire you to be more of every role within the Salesforce ecosystem and beyond. For today's session, we are exploring what it takes to be more enterprise architect. And I'm joined today by Shelly. So if you could start off by introducing yourself to our audience, please.
Hello, my name is Shelly Sousa. I am a lead engineer at a company called OpenTent. Recently, I was also with another organization as an enterprise architect.
Okay, awesome. And maybe let's dive into that a little bit more and explain to us, if you may, what it means to be an enterprise architect. Like, what type of responsibilities would you have in that role, and perhaps what would a typical day perhaps look like?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Um, and it's probably very ambiguous because you don't meet many enterprise architects, or it seems like we're in some like ivory tower where you can't talk to us somewhere. But it's certainly not how I work as an architect. But enterprise architecture it's really seeing the whole end to end. There's a few ways I describe it to people. I'll say maybe I'm just a senior software engineer. That's one way to say it. Or I'm a technical leader without direct reports because I'm more focused on leading the technical strategy than individuals. That's another way to put it. Still handle mentorship and guidance. But, I'm utilizing years and years of experience as an engineer, as a developer, even my background and, business analysis and project management. All of those things are coming together to help me take a look at the technical strategy for a deliverable, meaning we'd like to build this website for our entire company. And we'd like that website to have features like a payment portal. And we want customers to be able to log in and manage their accounts and update their usernames, all those things that, if you think about logging into Amazon or, just even Salesforce to do your work as admins or developers, right? All those things that make that interface work, everything you click on. How do you make all of that work together? And that's a really big picture. And how do you do it in a way where we're going to deliver this piece now and then this piece later? You have, product folks, I would say, more agile environment who think of the business strategy. We have to deliver the payment portal first, or we need e-commerce first. We need a shopping cart. Who's going to buy things if they don't have a shopping cart? Okay, shopping cart comes first, right? Let's log in, make that secure, and let's get a shopping cart, and let's make sure we have all the things that go in the shopping cart from the vendors that provide it. Let's do that first, and then we'll do all the other stuff later. Well, how do you make sure that when you're doing that stuff, the first few things you do, that the other things you're going to build are still going to work? And I think many of you can relate. At every company, you're going to have legacy systems. I say legacy, but you'll have older systems that have been around maybe longer than you've been alive. It's always possible. You might have some green screens, some old big mainframes that are probably taller than me. I'm pretty tall. You never know, but you need to find a way for all of those things to work together. Cloud systems with, on-prem hardware. So it's a lot to do. And the goal of enterprise architecture is you can think of planes, take a 30,000 foot view over everything. How are we going to tie all of this together and try to make it work?
Yeah. Okay. I love that. And I really like the notion of a technical leader as well. You said that, and I was like, yeah, okay. So you're kind of managing like the systems rather than the people. That's immediately where my brain went.
You got it 100%. And you're not building as much. And that can be not a misconception, but I think that's something I often get questions about is, are you still developing? Are you still building? And the answer is yes, but not nearly as much. My job as an architect or a lead engineer or technical lead is to spend more time guiding the overall building. Still building proofs of concept sometimes. Maybe if it's hard to explain, maybe I'll build a quick integration or, write a little Apex, or I will build out a flow, or, if it's in some other language, which it could be a totally different platform, I have to go work on that as well. And you need a lot of flexibility. So it really does take a lot of experience across multiple technologies. And you can think that an enterprise architecture team probably has multiple architects. Some are better at database work. Some are really great at things like .NET or C when they're programming. Everybody has different skills. It's impossible for everyone to know everything. And we have to work together to make this puzzle into a picture.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, that's a great pivot for the next question, because we're now going to pivot into how this role interacts with other roles. So what type of other people would you work with as an enterprise architect to kind of provide that piece of the puzzle? Like, would you work with admins, developers, consultants, other types of architects, executive leadership team? You probably span across everything, right?
Literally all of those things,
Yeah.
every single one. Yeah. And I say 30,000-foot view, but that's to get the big picture, right? Just to start. What are we trying to do and why do we want to do it? And what do we have today? That's, that's your beginning. That's your first step. But you have to talk to everyone. And I say this very often. My business analysis skills, my soft skills are EQ, as some people might say. I don't know if people like that term, but just being able to talk to people and listen is one of the most important skills I can have, because I don't know what I don't know until I start talking to people. So we'll talk to product managers, maybe executives, get the big picture from them. But I also have to talk to the engineers who are going to build it, the BAs and data analysts who are breaking down the requirements, who actually understand how this thing really works today and how it doesn't work. That's even more important. And even talking to the individual users, gladly sit in workshops when I can and just talk to the individuals who use the system from day to day. What is happening? Why does it work for you? Why doesn't it work for you? And what are you all looking for in the future? So I say 30,000-foot view, but you're coming down to, 50,000, like to 50-foot view. You have to go back and forth. And it's a balance that's hard to maintain sometimes, but that's the biggest challenge, to know when to jump in and when to jump back out quickly so you can provide the most help and value.
Okay. Awesome. That's great. And I love that notion of kind of zooming in, zooming out like you would on a picture, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's great, and that certainly makes sense to me. So thinking about this now as a role of an enterprise architect, and I think we touched on it already. So I have a hunch as to where you're going to go with this answer. But are you in that role full time, or do you play other roles as well? What do you think of that?
That's a great question too. So, when it really depends, I think, on the size of the organization and the organization's needs. I've certainly met many fractional architects, people who are maybe with consultancies who they'll play that role on a smaller scale, or maybe they'll just provide architecture oversight for certain projects for 3 to 6 months, and then that's it. You provided enough information value, you filled enough gaps to sort of help that organization or project move forward, and that's enough. Other teams or companies are performing big transformations internally. They have lots of systems they want to replace. They really want to upgrade or modernize how they're currently working today or delivering services to customers or products. And you might really need a not just one architect, but a team of architects who are working full time, because there's so many challenges. And when you think of a digital transformation, I'm sure plenty of you all have heard about it, but digital transformations can take years. They don't happen overnight. So like I said, it depends on the company and the project and what they're really looking for. But it could be either one. Sometimes you're building a little more. Sometimes you're planning a lot more, doing more diagrams in one company and doing more proofs of concept at another. So it really
Yeah.
does vary.
Okay. Awesome. So if there's somebody listening to this, right, and they're feeling inspired and they perhaps want to start out on their own journey towards something like being an enterprise architect, what tips, advice would you give to that person?
Gosh, I would say you're in for a ride,
Yeah.
and that's okay. It's a lot of fun. The very first thing is to really become an expert, or I say become very comfortable with a specific technology and start diving into what architecture means for that technology. And that's my personal opinion, but that's what I did with Salesforce, many years ago. This was 2018. I met, I'm going to shout out to Bhavna Singh. I met Bhavna and Steve Simpson at the TDX back when it was Trailhead DX. And I was really inspired by them. And I thought, I want to be an enterprise architect. I didn't even really know what that meant. I just said, that's what I want to do. So I set I gave myself a 5-year goal. I'm going to do this. I have no idea how, and told Bhavna that was what I was going to do. And I started learning about architecture in the context of Salesforce, because that's what I was doing every day. At the time, I was a BSA, business systems analyst, so half BA, right, hybrid BA and admin. And I used that as my opportunity to start understanding, well, what is the sharing model really doing behind the scenes, right? So meaning it's not just, roles, it's not just organizational security, there are actual tables in the background, like a database, that control whether you have sharing from accounts and contacts. How does that actually really work? And yes, of course, you can learn that through programming, but I mean, this is, also just database structures. So how I'm like, oh yeah, I understand SQL. Maybe I can apply that to Salesforce. Just understanding how that works is a game changer for how you approach solutions in Salesforce, because now you're understanding this is a database and here's the limitations to how it can do these lookups. So what I'm saying is, when you want to start out, go really, really deep on a topic if you can, and try to use some of the current projects that you're actually working on, because at least that way you have something to ground yourself in. It's not this mysterious thing like, now I'm working on identity and access, but I've never implemented SSO before, and my company already did this years ago, and I have no reason to try it. So, I mean, not to say you can't learn it on your own, but it's so much easier to do that when you're working on a project. I have 14 Salesforce certifications, and all of my architect certifications align with a project that I completed, which is why it took a while. For some people might fly through their certifications, but for me, I felt like, no, I don't want to get the data architect certification until I've actually performed a real large-scale data migration in a Salesforce org. So when I was dealing with 20 million, 100 million records, now I understand the scale. Now I understand data skew. Now I can go take that exam because I've actually experienced it. It worked better for me that way. So that's my suggestion, is to understand you're going to need time and start with something familiar, and then dive into the architecture and just really, really know it well. And it doesn't even have to be Salesforce, although we're all talking about Salesforce here. But start with something,
Yeah. Okay. And I think a couple of things that were important there. You had some great people to kind of look up to. And I think like that's kind of number one from what I take from that conversation. You were doing something that you were already relatively comfortable with. I think you were just expanding or kind of diving deeper into particular things. And kind of an additional question that I think of as I'm listening to you share about that is, how similar was your learning structure to the kind of traditional Salesforce architect like pyramid, where you have data architects and sharing visibility and identity and access? We've touched on a couple of those already, but would you say that you benefited from working towards those certifications as you were learning, and perhaps which certifications were particularly valuable or helpful, do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah. It was also helpful. And I do not necessarily recommend this because it was a lot. And of course, follow your own path. But during that 5-year period, I earned a total of 23 certifications. 14 were Salesforce, and then there were other ones. It's certainly not a brag. It was a lot of certifications. But I also went back to university at that time and completed my bachelor's and my master's degrees. And during that process, I had an opportunity to really focus on a few things like data structures and algorithms, really getting, really refining some of my programming skills. Earlier in my career, I was very focused on hardware, network operations and data center. And I wanted to just really switch into software engineering and just really understand, how do you actually develop good software products, and how do you use that logical process to kind of help you through. What I'm really saying is, one of the most valuable certifications I felt for me was the data architect certification, because behind the scenes, right, Salesforce is a database, and the syntax is very much like SQL. It's SOQL, right? Similar for a reason. And understanding how databases really work, how those data structures really apply when you're running those queries. Why are there limits to the database? You don't have limits. You have some, right? There's always constraints, but what does it really mean when you're creating a lookup field versus a master detail? What is that actually doing? And how does that relate to other technologies? If I'm thinking about SQL, what are the comparisons between them? What happens when I delete this and I'm not allowed to delete that? What does that look like? Oh, what about a cascade delete? And right, if I'm talking about SQL. So linking those things together in my mind was really important, but just understanding what Salesforce is truly doing behind the scenes, how these objects really tie together, and how they make all of Salesforce work was kind of the magic for me. That's when it all sort of clicked in my mind. And although I took the data architect certification a little bit later, I was really, I wouldn't say inspired, but it just really, really helped me understand these are the constraints. This is kind of the magic in a way of Salesforce, why it works the way it does for so many people, why so many customers are able to have it, how this multi-tenant environment really works. Why do we have limits here when if, in Java, you don't have a limit other than your memory, right? If you run out of memory, well, you run out of memory. In Salesforce, you have limits you have to consider right up front. I'm not saying you don't have to consider them in Java, but it's a little more flexible for a reason. So right up front, you have to be very, very good at managing that database, managing your storage. And it forces you to think about development in a different way. So like I said, I think the data architecture cert was probably my favorite. And it also tied into everything that I was refreshing on and learning at school at the same time. So it all just kind of reinforced. I really, really went deep on these topics as much as I could until I felt like maybe I conquered them in a way, like, high score on a video game. And now, so let's go on to the next one. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I love that. And I certainly have a soft spot for that certification as well. I perhaps came at it with a different approach. Like I was learning some of these concepts as I was learning the certification, and then was able to put those concepts into play afterwards. But they certainly helped and benefited. And like until studying for that exam, I probably didn't understand what data skew was or what LDV or large data volumes were. And it's like kind of perhaps some of this thing is like logical sense, but until I kind of studied for it in that structured way, it certainly pulled some of these things together that perhaps I knew or I'd experienced locking errors before. And then I did the exam and then I realized, oh, the locking error was because of account skew or whatever type of skew it was. So yeah, I think that was a really valuable one. Thinking about this now, if you were to start out on your journey to enterprise architect again, is there anything you would change or do differently, do you think?
Yes, you made a comment earlier about having a strong support system. And I was very fortunate to have, a lot of people leadership management, who were fully supportive of what I was trying to do, what I wanted to do. And I worked for companies that funded my education and paid for my certification. So not to say I didn't have a lot of support, because I had all of the support in the world, which is phenomenal. I could not have done it without everybody who was there for me throughout the entire journey. What I will say is, right from the start, I felt like I was, even though I was reaching out to people who were helping and utilizing all of those resources, I wasn't really connecting with other members of the community. And I'm not, there's no, no guilt or shame about that. I think the architect community is much more accessible these days, right? I know the well-architected team at Salesforce has done a great job. I always talk about architect at salesforce.com, but they've done a wonderful job of, evangelizing and getting people to learn more about, architecture in general and how to really design the best solutions for customers. So there's been a stronger focus on it in the last, 5 or 6 years, which has been great to see. But I think I could have helped myself more if I reached out to just more engineers in general, more architects in general. I think there might be a little bit of fear, or maybe, this is just a grumpy architect, really grumpy architect owner doesn't want to talk to me, or, Shelly knows a lot of things and she doesn't have time, or she's unapproachable. I don't think anybody ever says that about me. Probably, I hope not. But, I think it can seem like architects or senior engineers are not available to talk to. And you don't know until you ask. If someone says no, well, they say no. But I can't think of a time when someone has truly just said absolutely not ever. Maybe not right now, maybe not, but never no completely 100%, as long as you're coming with a real question that that they know they can answer. So I would say building a stronger community earlier on and trusting other people to support me would have been really great. But I say that knowing that I had good leaders and good mentors in the community pretty much the whole time. I do wish I was more vocal about my journey. That would have been really helpful, I think, just to tell people, hey, this is what I'm up to. What have you experienced? Because there's just so few enterprise architects out there.
Yeah.
It's one of those, you have to see it to be it sort of thing. And how many do you see?
No, yeah, not very well. Yeah.
Oh, there's very few. Something else too, I mentioned ivory tower architecture, which is this comment or this concept of, the architect is not accessible. The architect's not available. And something I've always told the teams that I've worked with is that the people who are building the actual solution, like I might build a proof of concept. Maybe I'm just throwing something out there really quickly just to test the integration. I'll integrate Salesforce and AWS. Let's just see if it works. Great. I'm going to hand off the rest to you, and you're going to build the rest. You are the person that's building 90% of this. You know what's architecturally significant. You may not have the time or experience to communicate that across all of the different channels that we need to communicate it to. People who are going to pay for these tools, right? Like our executives, or the people who are going to, to make decisions about what to prioritize, like the product folks, right? Product managers and product owners. But at the end of the day, you are the one building it. You will always know more than me as an architect about the most important pieces and parts of this, about the pitfalls, about the areas that I'm not thinking about, because I'm not staring at your code base every day. I'm not looking at what you're deploying. I don't see every change set or, what you have in, Gear Set or Capado or whatever you're using, or SFDX. I have no clue, because I look,
Yeah.
but that's your job. So you have to tell me and be open and honest with me. And it has to be a partnership so that I understand, what are we solving for and where do you need most help?
Okay. And I'm glad you mentioned change sets there. And I was like, I kind of had like a shiver or like utter panic. But yeah, you quite rightfully added on like Capado, Gear Set, DevOps, and some control and all of those other great things. I think, and maybe this is perhaps something that would be good to have your take on, but change sets aren't really set up for an enterprise system or environment.
No.
Capado or Gear Set or, one of those many tools that does that for a living is a much better fit, right? Do you agree with that?
I do. Yeah. I think, change sets, of course, they have their place. We wouldn't have Salesforce deployments without them.
Yeah.
They're the core of what we do. So, they still exist for a reason, and they're fine for small deployments, for something really quick. But we also have tools like DevOps Center and SFDX, and you can, use VS Code if you can get comfortable with it right out of the box. Just, set it up and just start deploying right away. That's version control. It's a little more complex, but you get history tracking, you get scratch orgs. There's a lot of great features there, but I will say it's very difficult to learn version control, to learn Git right from the start. It's not intuitive and it's really uncomfortable. So anybody out there who's tried to learn Git in the past and thought, what in the world is this? I don't know a single engineer that hasn't thought that. If they're telling you they got it right from the start, there's absolutely no way, because it just clicks one day when it just clicks, and it might take you a few weeks or a few months, but it's just not intuitive. It's a very odd way of thinking. It changes your mindset about how you're controlling what you're pushing and pulling. And that's, it's really odd at first, but it does give you the flexibility to just be able to deploy a single component, whatever that is, very, very quickly. So it can be valuable. But to your point, yeah, change sets are a bit clunky, but it's sort of like classic. It's out there because it had to be there. We had to start somewhere, right?
Yeah, and I guess in a couple of years' time, we'll be comparing like the enhanced Lightning interface to the current Lightning interface, and saying the same thing, right?
Exactly. Absolutely.
Okay. So now thinking about this, if there's someone listening, and as I said kind of earlier, they're maybe feeling inspired, what skills attributes would you use to describe what it kind of takes to be an enterprise architect?
Oh, definitely your soft skills. I always put those first. And I would say there might be some enterprise architects out there who could argue and say, no, it's the technical skills always first, or maybe that's just what they lean into because that's what they're comfortable with. But my ability to talk to other people, to have active listening skills, to really just hear people and what they're really looking for, that has never failed me ever. And I think you need to start with that, because we are building solutions and systems for people, for humans, at least at this point, right? AI hasn't replaced me completely. I still have to cook my own dinner, even though, I could order DoorDash, but, there's a human cooking my food. So it's not doing everything in this world. What I mean is we're still people that are building things for people, and being able to talk to each other is so important. And being able to talk to people at different levels, I hate to say levels, but different areas of your organization is also super important, because the way that you communicate with a peer, an engineer, or, your manager or director, product folks, right, is going to be very different than how you might communicate with an executive. Executives have a very small, short amount of time, and they really, you need to get to the point very quickly. So how do you distill the 1 hour conversation you just had with the engineering team into one slide, maybe not even one slide, one bullet point. That's it. One bullet point for that executive and what they need to know. And one way to do that is to talk to your leadership. Hopefully they're supportive. They're not supported. That's a whole different story. But talk to mentors and leaders who are willing to help you practice, to talk through it with you. There's lots of mentors out there. Find somebody you admire and ask, are they willing to meet with you and help you just role play a little bit? Like, I'd like to talk to someone in your position, right? This is like a director. I'd like to tell you about what's important about this project. What do you want to know? What do you care about? And can we just practice that a little bit? Again, I've asked people to do that in the past and I've never had anybody say no, ever. They might say later, they might say I'm busy this quarter, but they're usually pretty open, which is really nice. So that's one thing, soft skills for sure. And then obviously a breadth of technical skill is pretty darn important because, you need to understand as an enterprise architect, I'm talking a lot about Salesforce. This is this podcast is focused on, the Trailblazer community, and we are in the Salesforce world, right? Of course, that's my job today. And I think it's important for people to understand that enterprise means everything. So even though I may have been, a Salesforce expert in my organization, I still have to understand how all of these other tools work with Salesforce. So, right, all of the different types of integration options that we might use. I won't name drop a bunch of products, but we have lots of middleware systems that we may have to use. MuleSoft's a good example. I will name drop that one. But I mean, there's lots of different tools that we need to understand. AWS is a good one, or maybe it's Google Cloud, even Azure. How is all of this going to work? And then what's on the other side of that? Because sure, we might be using AWS to, create this integration to store data. Maybe we have, Oracle systems. I don't know. Maybe we have some other databases that we've created custom. How are we going to connect all of that back to Salesforce? And how do tools like Data Cloud and AI, how does that come into play now? There's so much to consider, but at its core, right, I say this pretty often, I think, is that, technology is still ones and zeros, right? It's still binary behind the scenes. We're still talking about computing. We're still talking about computers talking to computers, right? That part, I hate to say it, that part hasn't changed all that much, right? It's still voltage on, voltage off with a computer in the background. So you need to understand computing. You need to understand how systems talk to each other. And, modern computing capabilities. What does it really look like when you're moving to the cloud, so to speak? What does that even mean? Because, we call it the cloud, and that seems really ambiguous, but that's a data center somewhere with a bunch of, bunch of servers, like real hardware somewhere else. What does that mean? You need those technical skills. And I will say that understanding a bit about programming, even if you're not the best developer in the world, understanding a bit about programming is really important. I think there's some enterprise architects out there that say being a developer is an absolute must. Really knowing it well it will serve you well. And I will say that doesn't mean you cannot be an architect. But I would say enterprise architecture with the level of responsibility, you need to know so many different types of technologies. Knowing a language or two at a minimum is really beneficial. And it's not something I would recommend skipping.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. I think that's great. And I can certainly resonate to kind of knowing your technical knowledge, kind of having that, but also active listening, because I think a lot of this type of role is about relationships and understanding challenges and perhaps translating those things into technical solutions. Do you agree with that? Do you think that makes sense?
No, I love that, Tom. It's a perfect statement. It's relationship building all the way.
Yeah.
You're building relationships with other people because you're not building this for you, most likely. You're building this for everyone else. Especially if you're building tools or developing solutions for, a client in an industry that, maybe it's something you don't use very often. Like maybe I'm building something for, manufacturing company, and I don't work in manufacturing. This is for them to make their lives better. So, you have to think through what is their true experience. And if you don't have a good relationship with that client or with that customer or your colleagues, how are you going to build the right thing?
Yeah, you need to empathize with their challenges and kind of put yourself in their shoes to understand what's the best way to solve it. I think that's a really great kind of soundbite there. So thinking about this role now of enterprise architect. If there's one thing you'd like to change or make people more aware of about the role, so maybe there's a common misconception, they think enterprise architect and they think this one kind of quite rigid thing, which perhaps isn't true. Is there anything that comes to mind that you would like to just clarify for our audience?
I think maybe that we're all just, cranky engineers in a corner that don't want to talk to anybody. And, you might not be wrong, but I haven't had my breakfast yet. I don't know. Maybe I'm a little cranky. No, it's not true. Yeah, like I said earlier, like maybe we're unapproachable, or even that it's impossible to become an enterprise architect. That you can't do it. I think it can be a bit chaotic is maybe a good way to explain it. You really need to be comfortable with having your thoughts, your brain in multiple places at different times. Someone I used to work with always made a great comment. She said it was not multitasking; it was time slicing. So, right. So you're not doing multiple things at the same time. You're taking that 1 hour, maybe slicing it into 5 or 10 pieces. And that's, I like thinking of enterprise architecture as sort of this slicing activity where you are slicing your day into different pieces. And maybe you're talking to an executive in the morning and, engineering team in the afternoon, and then you're drawing diagrams. And then maybe if you have time, you're working on a proof of concept, pulling together something really quickly. It's a lot of change, a lot of, task switching, context switching, and that can be really difficult. But that doesn't mean that it's impossible. Many people are great at that and love it. So it doesn't mean it's unapproachable. It doesn't mean you can't do it. It also does not mean that the enterprise architect knows everything. And it doesn't mean that you can't have a conversation with them and challenge some of their ideas. Might be difficult, right? Might be a tough conversation. But I personally love it when an engineer comes back to me and says, that is not going to work. What are you talking about? And it's like, because that prompts a conversation. Like, what am I missing? Let's have a conversation. You tell me all about it. What do I not know? That's a surprise. That's something new that I'm going to learn that I didn't know before. And I don't know, personal opinion, if your enterprise architect isn't curious about those gaps, then they should be.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. Curiosity, I think, is really important in general in most roles. So unfortunately, we are bringing today's session to a close. But before we do end, what's a way for people to connect with you? And are there any particular pieces of content that would perhaps help somebody if they are on their journey towards enterprise architect?
Absolutely. Definitely find me on LinkedIn if you'd like to connect with me, if you're not already. I'm pretty active on there. Even if I'm not posting, I'm always responding to messages, and I am always happy to answer a question. I answer questions for people anytime. So never hesitate to just reach out, say hello, and ask for my thoughts or opinion. I will gladly provide it. And like I said, that's probably the best way to get a hold of me. And then, also, if you want to learn more about becoming an enterprise architect or just becoming an architect in general, I do recommend, Nadina Lisbon. Nadina's amazing. She was recent architect Golden Hoodie winner. I'm just Golden Hoodie winner in general because she's incredible. She has a podcast, Tech Sips with Nadina. I would listen to that because Nadina really dives into some great topics. A bit of a plug for Nadina, but she is really trying to demystify what enterprise architecture is all about. And the concepts are important concepts. They're core concepts that it doesn't matter what type of platform you're on, but she does it in the flavor of CRM, which I think is great. And the last one is go to architect.salesforce.com and just start exploring, learn more about how to create diagrams and check out the anti-pattern explorer, pattern explorer. Super, super helpful.
Yeah, and I certainly relate to that last one personally as well. When I'm looking for a template for a diagram or something, that's kind of my first port of call there because I'll usually be doing something with a Salesforce flavor to it. I can always go to that website and I can be like, oh, okay, nonprofit cloud program management. Okay, remind me of how that data model even looks sometime. Right? There's a lot going on. So yeah, I think it is a great tool and a great resource. So thanks again for your time today. And hopefully we inspire maybe some more enterprise architects. So thanks again.
Thanks, Tom.